Today we are with visionary and permaculture pioneer, Bill Mollison. It's an honor to have you here with us today, Bill.
Good, Frank.
For the purpose of this interview, I think that the genesis and philosophy and impact of permaculture can probably best be understood within the context of your life story. Can you briefly talk about your childhood days in Tasmania?
Well, I was all children then. We were all barefoot. Nobody wore shoes, and we all ran around the country and climbed trees and looked at. I collected shells. I did hundreds of miles of beach walking. Later in life, I presented my collections.
Now, your professional career spanned a period of approximately 20 years in the field, in academia and elsewhere, before you embarked on the articulation of permaculture. Tell us about that period and how it was important in forming your ideas.
Well, I was basically a fisherman for many years, and then they closed down the service boats that would bring our supplies because they closed down the lighthouses. And so I came ashore and I looked for work, and the work I was offered was in wildlife survey. So I took that job and held it for 10 years, and I had another 10 years in university teaching. And my real interest was in animal populations, and eventually got to be the effect of stressors on populations and on adrenals or adrenal glands and endocrine function. So I ended up studying endocrine function in populations of animals, including human beings. So I transferred to psychology, and we studied people's behavior in relation to stress systems.
Now, how was it that the study of people's behavior kind of led you to permaculture?
Well, it did. The thing that did was applied work in the CSIRO, that's a Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, where I was required to help reforest cut over rainforest coops. And coop is just a cut over area. And I found a lot of trouble getting reforestation with possums, wallabies and kangaroo coming in on them. So I developed live traps and removed them 9 miles away from the coops, and in a few weeks I could get rid of practically every animal. So I was live trapping these animals and marking them, and later on I did a lot of behavioural observation work on them, and that's what led to permaculture. One night I was sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, I think I could design a better system than this. Well, I think I could easily design a system that would work as well as this one. So that was just a thought in my mind, but I actually wrote it down in my diary at the time. And it was some years later that I did design a system with animals and plants in that worked very well.
So, from my understanding, it was in the early 1970s that you began working on the idea of permaculture. Did the concept,
yeah, that's right.
Did the concept come to you all at once in an epiphany type experience?
It was an epiphany. Indeed it was, yeah. And I likened it to cutting a string on a roll of carpet on top of a hill and watching it roll away to the horizon. I could see for miles ahead and years to come. Often people said to me, I bet you're surprised at whatever they say, at the extent it spread. I said, no, I saw it all before. I saw it all at the beginning.
So can you tell us about that moment? What was it? Where were you? And what was it? What exactly was happening?
Well, after the Club of Rome report back there in the 70s, we all realised that the world had to change its ways. But the universities didn't realise that, and they didn't change, and still haven't changed their ways. So most people continued to teach the same things and lead the same lifestyle. And I felt I had to change. And so I left society and went out and I bought a bush block and I cleared it and put a garden in and a barn in that I could live in. All of that took me about a month or a month and a half. And I sat there and thinking, I haven't done anything to change anything, really. So I decided to come back into society and work there. And it seemed to me that all my old friends who'd invented good agricultural systems hadn't gone very far. And the reason was I hadn't taught anybody else about them. So as I was an academic at the time, I sat down and wrote out a curriculum, and that's the one I still teach. And it became the Permaculture Designer's Manual. So that's a curriculum for a course that will A, look after the earth, and B, look after you and your family, your neighbours, and it's a whole system. It deals with, trees, water, animals, and in terms of permaculture thinking or design thinking, it must include also the imponderables of finance, legal structure under which you hold land, and so on.
Now, in one of your books, you state that by 1984, many of the systems that we had proposed a decade earlier did in fact constitute a sustainable earth care system. Could you talk about the process of validating these systems?
Yes, we started actually designing in the late 1970s, but we did a lot of work. I think I did over 1,000 farm designs in Victoria in 2 years. And then we asked for feedback from the owners or people working the farms. And the same, I did some coconut plantation work in the Indian Ocean, and that I have a dog that barks at everybody who comes. Anyhow, I asked them to tell me how my plantation worked. Everything seemed to be working well, which is no surprise, because if you think about it and your system is based on observation of systems, then it ought to work well. And somebody said to me once, does permaculture work? And I said, do trees grow if you plant them? It's sort of like a natural thing to me that it works.
So once you actually validated some of the systems and saw that it was working, what was the trajectory of the movement after that?
Well, I took up teaching mainly. I saw that there was a meeting in '72, I think, in Toronto on land planning, and I attended it, and I said there that we knew that there was a lot wrong, but we didn't have the army that would be needed to change it. So we only had one job, and that was to train the army who would change things, and I felt that very keenly. So I sat out and I gave 3-week courses at that time. They're now 2-week courses, and I'd often do them end to end. So I'd teach solidly for 6 weeks and get 90 people out on the ground. But I've done that for 25 years or 30 years. So and I did, in fact, set up that army because I asked all my students to teach, and many did. So they teach in their own language and in their own culture. I've taught in every continent, and in a lot of Africa and India and Asia and the Pacific, and in most American states, South America and Central America. And so I left a lot of students everywhere.
So what have been some of the fruits of what they've done? I'm sure they've done things that you would never have even thought when you were teaching them. Can you give us some examples?
Well, that's where you're wrong. I cut the string on that carpet, and the carpet told me everything. So I thought, if I teach people, they will become teachers, and they will teach people. And that in fact happened. And there's some very, very good teachers some people were, like me, very attracted to deserts and went into the deserts and became very good people in management of deserts. Others just got stuck in prairies, re-establishing grassland prairies, and others again went into forests, and so on. But all in all, they've tackled most every environment that exists on Earth, I think, and then a few of them, and only about 1 in 30 or 40, become teachers too. So that's enough. They teach others.
Let's talk a little bit about permaculture in practice. Essentially, permaculture, as you describe it, is a design science. Can you describe the principles and methods of design and how they are applied?
Well, yeah, I was the first person that I know of to write a definition of functional design. I'm not talking about non-functional design, you know, pretty patterns on dresses or something. The functional design has to save energy. That's its main function. And conserve materials, conserve resources, whether it's money or water. So it sets out to do those things. And when you put in a good design, you don't waste water, you don't waste other materials, especially organic materials, or return to the soils. The soils are treated very well, and in modern times we've also adopted the notion that you return microorganisms to the soil to assist trees and crops, and that's been a great success. We adopt things we see as being beneficial, so we adopt them into permaculture. One of the things I saw very early on was swales. They are systems put in by engineers in the 1930s in America to halt overland flow of water. They put contour ditches of great size, about 8 feet across at the bottom and 15 to 20 feet across at the top, and absolutely dead-on contour, and going for miles. And they did. They stopped the big rush of water across the land, and it filled these ditches, and it would last up to 3 days and then slowly seep away. But when it seeped away, it travelled from there on through the soil and subsoil. So it set up a vast automatic watering system from rainfall. And I've used that just everywhere. We've been using it in settlements lately too. And village homes in California, a suburb of Davis, it put in its swales, and it has several years of water stored below the landscape of the houses. And they don't water the trees there, the fruit trees and the other trees. They all live off groundwater, and they made the groundwater, and there are no oases in a city, Davis, which has no other oasis. So they have 18 feet of groundwater stored, and nobody else has. So by using swales on a broad scale in the landscape, running miles of them, which we've done, we store vast quantities of water. There's plenty of rainfall for everybody. There just isn't enough storage.
Now, this goes along with what you're saying, and an important concept in permaculture is from source to sink. Can you provide some other examples? Right. Some other examples of how this works?
Yeah, well, energy comes into the system one way or another, or essentials do. Birds fly into all systems, as do insects. Like all your phosphate and nitrogen really is flying about in the system. How can you stop it? Well, I believe you must build up your local birds, so I plant lots of flowering trees and small fruits, and that brings a lot of birds in. And some of my crops, like sweet potato, I can't find a single leaf on my sweet potatoes that doesn't have 2 or 3 bird droppings on it. So really what we do, we stop the phosphate on the farm. And I said to somebody once, birds are much braver than I am. They don't care how much phosphate they put on a garden. I wouldn't put on as much phosphate as they do.
Talk about the importance of edge in permaculture.
Yes, that's a very good concept. The edge of anything, like the edge of two systems, the edge of the forest, the edge of the sea, is the richest place. It has the most species. It has species from the environments either side of the edge, and there are species that just belong to the edge itself. And here, as I look out the window, I have an edge with lots and lots of flycatchers along that edge and little grass birds, and they're both insectivores. And they're working all the time, but nowhere else but on the edge. And they bring a lot of phosphate to Earth, so they enrich the edge itself. And edge in all crops will have up to double the yield of within the crop. So you never sample a crop and include the edge. You always walk in the crop and sample it, because if you count the edge in, you get a very heavy crop, which you don't get. So I plant crops that are nothing but edge. If the edge extends 4 feet in the crop, and you can see that, I'll plant strips of crop 8 feet wide, and then an accessory crop in between. And so the main crop is nothing but edge, and that'll give you double your yield. So basically what I've done often enough, I've used that system, and I get same yield as a crop fully planted right across the field by only planting half the field. So I plant half the field and then yet another crop with a very different crop. And so I've sort of doubled the acreage. My challenge to people, to my students, is how many acres of yield can you get from 1 acre of land? And I've had up to 8 acres of yield from an acre of land. Well, then you have to go into multi-tier agriculture. So you get an acre of pears and an acre of gooseberries, an acre of wheat, all on the same acre.
So this is a concept that is very much opposed to industrial agriculture.
No, it can go as big as you like, and the bigger you go, at some stage you become industrial agriculture.
I guess what I'm getting at is most industrial agriculture is monoculture, and what you're arguing for is polyculture.
Oh, well, monoculture is a silly idea. It wasn't a good idea to start with. Nothing to say about it. It's a ridiculous idea. It gives you your least crop and most damage and most effort, and is less sustainable than any other system.
Why is it so prevalent in the landscape, though? That's something that kind of baffles me.
Because it's basically simple. It's simple. You don't have to think. You just remove everything there was on the landscape, every tree and shrub and weed, and sterilize it, spray it or plough it, and put in what you think you want, and grow that. And it doesn't last long. And generally the losses are great. I think the losses from maize crops in America are like 4 tons of soil per annum per acre, or at times 40 tons if you plough a steep hill. So you can never make up your losses. Nobody carts soil back onto their land. You do 100 acres of corn for 100 years, and you're out of business. And agriculture salts up areas. In Australia, an area the size of Ireland itself is made salt every year by agricultural practices. Agriculture is responsible for the loss of 40% of all soils in the last 50 years. So it's a dastardly affair. If I were emperor, I would ban agricultural colleges and agricultural departments in universities, because they haven't ever come up with a sustainable system of food production. All they've ever come up with is yet another monoculture. I'm sometimes asked by the students of agricultural colleges to come and address them, and I ask them to look at the results of their education. I said, how many of you get your master's degree or your postgraduate degree, and how many of those get work? they're a bit shy about it, but they admit that nobody ever gets a job. I said, yeah, because what you're learning is something that nobody wants.
Now, one thing that you point out is that as the number of soil scientists has increased, it's also correspondingly increased erosion.
Yes, correct. They increase about at the same rate of erosion. Erosion beats them slightly. They obviously are having no effect on what they're supposed to have. We train soil scientists, so the soil is conserved and there's not much erosion. What we get is vastly increased erosion and loss of soil and destruction of soil by salt. And soil scientists are notably absent in the field. You hardly ever meet one.
So what can we do to, what are some of the best strategies that you've seen and employed to address these issues of land degradation and soil erosion, probably some of the most pressing issues that are facing us today?
Well, I started with conserving all rainfall, so I start with swaling the entire landscape. Start from 3 feet down from the highest point. So you run a contour right around the highest point, except for where you're going to access it. Leave a little road across the swale. And you keep on going 3 meters lower each time until you get to the plains. And then you go up to 100 meters apart with swales. So now water can't wash across that landscape anywhere. It must stop and soak in the landscape and travel extremely slowly. A couple of meters below the surface, and probably after 4 rains, you could grow trees for 100 years without ever watering them. And what you've done, you've set up huge storages. The landscape itself is the largest storage we can use. We can't keep all the water that falls in dams because they can only ever contain 15% of it. The rest of it always runs off. And we're always complaining in Australia that we've got drought or we're running out of water. And my farms that I've lived on as well, they never have drought. They're green all the time because there's water moving through the land. It's going to take it maybe 15 or 30 years to go all the way to the streams and leave the property.
As you talk about water, water is very much a sensitive issue. It's become very contentious around the world.
Yep.
How can we ensure access to clean and abundant water?
It's so simple. It seems like you have to be an idiot not to. I have 3, 4, 5 tanks. Each of them are 10,000 gallons, 44,000 litres. On my house and buildings, barns and things. And I'm never short of clean water because it's distilled water and it's falling from the clouds. So that accounts for all my domestic use and at-home garden use. And then I always swale fields and catch the overland flow too. And I put in big dams, 10 megalitre dams. Water from them early in the rainy season and count on the swales to keep on the water for most of the year. So I never have any water problem. And if anybody else ever did what I did, we wouldn't have a water problem. But I don't see a single government authority swaling or in many of our cities, up to very modern time, it was forbidden to put a tank on your house because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. So, in a sense, bylaws were preventing you becoming water sufficient, and that's kicked back badly on Australia because whole cities are going to have to close down if droughts continue. And yet, a city can store vast amounts of water, enough to do itself for years, if it catches its roof water, which it now doesn't because it made silly bylaws. Sometimes it seems like a cosmic joke that if you're sort of simple-minded and lazy, you're bound to become extinct. Anybody who practices monoculture and doesn't have a water catchment off their roof, I think, invites extinction.
Are we inviting extinction now?
Yeah, and I think extinction is a matter of stupidity, so the stupid become extinct. And people who weren't stupid are not bothered.
How do you see the permacultural scenario of energy security playing out over the next 20 or 30 years?
Well, much as it has played out, if you put in the energy you want, solar or wind energy or water energy, whichever, there's many, lots of it, and there's hot rock energy and so on. You've got energy. If you didn't put it in, you don't have it. And right now, I think Australia has gone mad and putting even the most remote house and the most degraded little house will have all its electricity on its roof. There's solar. And most have their hot water systems as a solar hot water system. But I expect every house that survives in 100 years' time will have all its own heating and electricity built into it. And already they're demanding that houses supply 80 or 90% of their own energy by design. So that as you build the house, you insulate it, you put on its collectors, you put on its solar hot water and so on. And with the modern developments, they push that energy higher and higher. And in the end, the people are building houses that produce far more energy than they use, so that's sold to the grid.
What about
that's the future.
What about energy and transportation?
Well, here's a strange thing. I don't know what people are worried about that. I don't know what people are doing in all those cars. I often look at them going on the road. I think, what the hell are they doing? I asked a truck driver once, what are all of these trucks doing? He said, oh, moving widgets. I said, what are widgets? He said, anything totally useful. He said, I'm taking this huge load of breakfast cereal to, I was in America. He said, I'm taking to San Francisco. My friend is coming from San Francisco with the same load and taking it to New York. So they're moving widgets in all directions and doing nothing that they consider to be essential. And I think most of the traffic on the road is inessential. And I stayed with friends in Los Angeles, and every evening they'd say, well, let's go drive. And they'd go and cruise the streets to see what they could see. And everybody else was cruising the streets, you know. And I don't know what all that's about. But I grew up in a town of 700 people. We had 3 horses and 3 low carts with pneumatic wheels. And they moved all the furniture. They delivered all your meat and milk to the door. And they picked up people from the railway station and took people to the railway station. So we had total mobility, and we travelled overseas. We had boats. And I would cross the Australian mainland on my fishing boat often enough. So 3 horses, 700 people, that's a horse and float, low cart with pneumatic tyres, to each 200 people. So you can never run out of horsepower, perhaps. I don't think you can use 1,000 horsepower to go cruising at evening, no. And I'm not sorry when that ends. It hasn't got long to go. I love society when we just had horses. It was just beautiful.
What is your take on peak oil, Bill?
Peak oil? Oh, yeah, that's a sort of a frenzy. All the people I know interested in peak oil, or who use the words peak oil, are kind of, they're frenzied, and it's as though they're frightened the daylights out of themselves, and they want to frighten everybody. What happens when you get frightened of running out of oil? You get useless, you know. If they just bought a horse, they'd do better. I think they never lived in an area which didn't have oil. If they did, and you can. I commonly stay a long time in African villages, and I stay a long time in Indian villages. You don't have oil houses or oil or cars. The life is very good. I like village life. And 1 or 2 horses, 1 or 2 oxen, that's all you need. We don't normally shift a lot of weight, and they'll shift all we need.
Do you see us shifting to a more agrarian type society out of necessity?
Well, yeah, you have to think about producing your food sooner or later. You can't look to somebody else all the time to look after you, you know. And people often come to my courses and they say, I expect we've got organic food to eat. And I say, well, are you a great organic farmer? And they say, no, I don't farm at all. I say, well, you expect somebody else to work for you. Is that right? And I said, your expectancies are unrealistic. If you want organic food, you have to grow organic food. And if you ask somebody else to do it, you really can't trust it. So, yeah, we'll have to become more responsible for our lives. But what's wrong with that? I mean, it doesn't take you long. It's quicker, I found, and so have some of my friends. It's quicker to have a home garden and eat from that than it is to go to the shop. If I go to the shop from where I'm living now, I'm on a small farm, I travel 17 miles to a little town, and it always takes me all day to shop. And I come home, so I spend a whole day. Well, you never spend a whole day making your garden, or you'd have more food than you could eat.
Could you talk a little bit about the transition period? You've shown this a little bit in your books. When you take a area that's been monocultured for many years and you turn it into a permaculture, how long is that transition period and what occurs during that time?
Oh, well, over the next 12 months you could turn it right around. First of all, you conserve all the water that lands on that land and you soak it into the land. Act one, scene one. And that stimulates growth. And then you put quite a lot of trees in. They can be very productive trees. They can be chestnuts. Matter of fact, I think I worked out once you only put in 12 trees and it takes you an hour and they supply all your needs. If you put in 3 or 4 olive trees, that's all your shampoos and oils, and that's all your cooking oil and your lighting oil. And you put in 3 or 4 chestnuts, that's more than enough to make all your bread and stuff. And a few prunes and apples, and you're home and dried. So for half an hour's brisk work with a mattock, put in enough trees to support you forever, and all your descendants. And if people don't do it, that's their affair. If they choose never to lift a finger to help themselves, then, you know, I can't weep over them.
How is permaculture relevant to what's being described as the global warming crisis?
Well, you wouldn't have had it if you're all in permaculture, because you wouldn't be buzzing around in hundreds of horsepower vehicles all day long, which everybody seems to be. It was just it's just a phase that humanity went through, and it was ridiculous, really, when you think about it. All you've got to do in America, at least, is go and stand by one of those freeways, and oh God, you think this is madness. It's like a giant fire that everybody's caught in, and across the landscape drifts this yellow smog, which you can't breathe very well. And in Los Angeles, they always have big posters going up, don't run, don't get out of your car, don't exercise, because you'll die. And this is living in your own stupidity. So I don't see where it came from, or why people persist in it. I mean, I'm like everybody used to be, your grandfather was. We grew up in villages, and we thought they were great. And it was quiet, and I think the village I grew up in had 2 cars by the 1930s, and they were both belonged to my father, who was an engineer. And we used them once a year to go for a picnic. And that's how essential cars are. They're not. They're best gone.
Do you see that permaculture design can help us to solve this global warming crisis, or is it too far gone for that?
No problem. Yeah, sure. Just everybody has to get with it. And it solves all your so-called crises. The crises are brought on by people who don't want to do anything for themselves. People running around talking about peak oil are not producers. They're there wringing their hands. The people who are producers, forget about it. I've got a friend down the road here. He collects drums and drums and drums of cooking oil, and he uses it in his diesel truck. So he already out of the crisis. And people willing to do something for themselves, and they don't have a crisis. They get out of it before it occurs. And people who want to control others talk about peak oil and crisis because everybody else is panicking. Don't worry, I'll save you. They don't say how. George Bush looks as though he's trying to save America by turning all the corn into alcohol. Much the same thing as Brazil did. And he won't have enough corn. It was a silly idea. What they don't think of is stopping all the cars. That's never the solution. It is a problem. The problem is there are thousands of cars going nowhere, doing nothing. And the solution is remove them. Have a system by which you stop every truck and every car on a road. And if it's not on essential work, you put a bullet through the engine block and cancel the driver's license. And in a few days' time, you don't have any crisis. Well, you've got idiots running around like blowflies who have crisis because it takes, a huge amount of energy to keep someone running around in a 50 horsepower car.
Now, there's something quite unique about permaculture as a discipline. Last week I spoke with Paul Stamets, who's really revolutionizing the way that we use mushroom mycelium in our
Paul, many years ago, I've heard from him periodically. He's a good man.
What is it about permaculture that can absorb Paul's ideas and adapt them to the system so readily, whereas other types of systems or disciplines might reject something like that?
Well, I think you put your finger on it when you said disciplines. What is a university? A university is a collection of disciplines, all competing for the same money and a limited number of students. So what they've done is set themselves up against each other. And you can't teach permaculture in a university because it deals with finance, it deals with agriculture, it deals with forestry, it deals with meteorology, and you're not allowed to teach all that in one discipline. You'd soon have the disciplines fighting each other and fighting over grant money. The word sustainable became a non-meaningful word when every university in America tried to get grants for developing sustainable systems, when not one of them could define the word sustainable. I was invited to a meeting of them once. There must have been 30 of them sitting around a table in Texas. And I asked them, can I hear your definition of sustainable? And none of them had one. They hadn't thought about what they were doing is looking for money for sustainable systems because it sounded good. But none of them either had a sustainable system or a definition of what one would be. So I said to my students who were also watching this, I said, I think we might as well go home. There's nothing to learn here. So we left them all sitting there. Some things have become dirty words, and sustainable is one, I'm afraid. Sustainable does have a definition. Any system which, over its lifetime, produces enough to have created and maintained itself is sustainable.
Along those lines, and according to your definition of sustainable, I think anybody that's thoughtful quickly realizes that our future, and our present for that matter, as it stands now, is not sustainable. On the flip side...
No. No way.
On the flip side of that,
No way.
Bill, how will we know when we are actually living in a sustainable society?
Oh, you can go and look at a few. I mentioned village homes to you in terms of a complete swaling system for a suburb in Davis. It took on several other things too. It demanded that its houses be 80% energy self-sufficient, and they've done much better than that. And so if you go there, you'll find people, their quarterly total cost for energy and fuel and everything of a friend of mine living there is $15. So he needs to make $60 a year. They sell off quite a lot of their food because they planted the whole area in food. I think they've got 17 tons of almonds a year that they sell. And so they've got vast excesses of food, more water than they know what to do with, and plenty of gainful employment. So, you know, they're out of it. And anybody else can go out of it too. You can go out of it on the basis of a single homestead, or you can join with others and make it a sustainable development. We're always helping people plan those. So yeah, it's not difficult.
On a final note, what is it that you know, all the problems that we've talked about in the course of this interview and all the potential solutions, what are some of the things that give you hope that we're going to be able to do this?
My students who become teachers, they're the only thing that gives me hope. And they're in contact with me frequently. They give me hope, but there is no other hope. I don't see anybody else or any other system changing its ways. The universities are totally useless, and I think should be got rid of because all they are is spending money on false premises. And nothing's come out of them. Helps us. So, and the agriculture department should have been banned years ago. So yeah, there's not much to look to. And nearly everybody wants a car to run around in. So yeah, there's not much hope out there. I think there's a sort of a wish for suicide. This society behaves without wishes that we're dead, and it will be. But at least we can gather them up and use them as fertilizer.
Now, one of your big assertions is, and I think that anybody would agree with this, that's sensible, we will only become sustainable if we make the decision to do it and then do it.
Yes, that's right.
Do you think we're going to make that decision? What's your stance on that?
Thousands of people are, and here in Australia we have lots of television programs on families, and we have a sort of a funny program running all the time. There's two people in red coveralls, and they've got carbon cops on their back, and they go into households and weigh up the amount of tonnage they're putting into the atmosphere a year and get them down to carbon neutral, or even get them to plant a couple of hundred trees and become carbon, stop up other people's carbon. So it's a continuous sort of subject of television and of radio of people changing their ways. So it can happen, and if it happens fast enough, they'll be okay, but it has to happen everywhere. If all the Australians change their ways and Chinese don't, well, we haven't advanced. It's not that you just can't use coal. You can't dig coal and export it either. So for us to become sustainable, we've got to stop exporting coal. Now, not one of our politicians would even dream of doing that because that might take some of their power away. And they are ephemeral creatures, politicians. As long as they are on top for the time that remains, that's all that matters. So they're a very dangerous way to set policy. Politicians should be removed because they have no policies that don't help them last during their lifetime. And our politicians fight like mad not to stop exporting coal. And we're exporting uranium, but we don't use it. We don't have any atomic power stations, but we export uranium to everybody who does. Now, we've got to stop that.
Are we at the crossroads now to make these decisions, or?
Oh, we have been for several years. I think it was critical 20 years ago, and I think now it's super critical. We've already lost the world's ice, you know. Can't stop that. And that means like a 70-metre rise in the end in sea level. So I hope you live above 200 or 300 metres elevation.
I'd like to thank you so much, Bill, for joining us, for sharing your ideas with us, for telling
My
maybe
pleasure.
some people that haven't heard about permaculture. Maybe this is the first time they're being exposed to it, and maybe other people have been practicing it for many years and are delighted to hear your perspective on things now. Thank you so much.